Today, I'll show you how to create this timeline animation for your YouTube videos. Hi, my name is Denis Zhilin, and I'll show you how to make it in After Effects. Create a new composition. Set the resolution to 3840 by 2160, 12 fps, 30 seconds long. Name the composition The Timeline. Create a solid, layer, new, solid. Name it BG for background. Set the color to yellow or F8 DB30. Create one more solid layer. Layer, new, solid. Name it Grid. Set the color to white. Go to the Effects and Presets panel and type in Grid. Drag this effect over your grid layer and make grid cells smaller. Something like this. Change the blending mode of the layer to Soft Light. Hit T to open the opacity and set it to 69. The background looks like this now. It's not too bad, but we can make it better. Let's add some textures. I've got two images for my background. This beautiful aerial photo from Michelle Spollen on Unsplash and the 1898 London poverty map from the London School of Economics. It is also available on Unsplash. They've got lots of maps like this. And now you might ask, why have I chosen these two images for the background? It looks like a weird choice, right? Well, what we are looking for here are the textures, not the images. To make the background look good, the textures must be barely visible and undistinguishable. They must create a feeling rather than immediately show the image to the viewer. It's some kind of a visual noise that our eyes and brain like. To achieve the best results, the image must be either a map with many high-contrast lines, such as highways, rivers, and mountains, or a photo of something really smooth, gentle, low-detailed, and low-contrast. Only in these two cases it works best. You can also combine these two approaches and find something interesting as a result, just like we're doing right here. Also, check out my Patreon. You'll find project files from this and my other tutorials, as well as a lot of useful motion graphics for your YouTube videos. You'll find their free graphics too, so check it out at patreon.com/DenisZhilin. Now let's import the images and blend them together. Drop the images onto the timeline and set the blending mode to Soft Light and opacity to 44. Do the same with the poverty map image, but set the opacity to around 20 this time. Drop it under the other texture. Now, let's discolor the textures, so that they do not change the yellow color of the background to something else. Go to the Effects and Presets panel and type in black and white. Drop the effect onto the texture layer, copy and paste it onto the other texture layer. And now the background looks like this. Select the Rectangle tool. Set the color to 282828. Set the stroke to none. Draw a line and reposition the anchor point to the center. You can find this free script at ascripts.com. Go to the rectangle path, remove the sling by clicking on it, and set the width to 10 and the length to 3650. Hit P to open the position and set the X position to 1920 and set the Y position to 1080. Rename the layer to Timeline. Let's add some glow. Go to the Effect, Stylize, Glow. Set the glow radius to 40 and glow intensity to 0.4. This is how the background and the timeline look right now. Duplicate the timeline layer. Go to the Contents, Rectangle, Rectangle Path. Set the size to 10 by 50. Move it to the beginning of a timeline. Dip it into the timeline with the other end. Here I noticed that this piece was too short, so I increased its height to 50. But don't worry, you already did it. Rename the timeline 2 layer into the Date. We'll make this piece appear each time the timeline approaches the date. Now it's time to add the text. Select the text tool, set the font to Montserrat Bold, size 100 pixels. Set the paragraph to align the center. Draw a text box and type in the first date. Move it so that the center of the title is directly above the date shape. Duplicate the layer by hitting Ctrl D and move it above the first text. Type in the name of your slide and decrease its size to about 50 pixels. Turn off all the caps setting if it's on. In my case, it was on, and put it somewhere here. Select both of these text layers and set the text color to 282828. Now it's time to import the images, but first, let's remove their backgrounds in Photoshop. Drop your images into Photoshop. Pick any image and press the Select Subject button. It will create a somewhat decent selection around your subject. Then press the Create Mask button. It will create a mask and apply it to the image. It will remove the background and we'll be able to refine it. Select the mask and press B on the keyboard. It will switch to the brush tool. Hit D on the keyboard to switch to the default colors, black and white. You can remove the pieces of the image with the black brush and add them back with the white one. Press the X button to switch between the colors. Use the square brackets to change the brush size. Hit the right mouse button over the image and it will open the brush menu. Set the brush hardness to 90%. Sometimes you can simplify your refining work by using the Magic Wand tool. It works really well when you need to select a piece of an image that doesn't have much details in it, but it has high contrast borders, like this white piece here. If it makes weird selections, you can play around with the tolerance settings. It defines how sensitive the selection is. The higher the value, the more sensitive it is. I will lower it down to 5 in this case. When the background selection is active, brush it with your brush tool. This way we can brush over the background quickly and with low precision, and still we will not paint over the borders. This technique is handy for speedy draft background removal. When finished with the drawing, hit Ctrl D to remove the selection. You can add some minor touches with the brush. And now, let's crop the image. The sides of the image are empty anyway. Select the crop tool or hit C on a keyboard and set the borders like this. Go to the next image and repeat all the steps. Select the subject, mask it. The automatic selection did a poor job on this Apple Lisa computer. That's why we'll fix it manually with the brush tool. We'll add the missing foreground with the white brush and remove the background we don't need anymore with the black one. Sometimes the automatic selection might give you very rough edges, like in this case. You can fix them by going along the edge with the brush with 90% hardness. It will make the edges look soft and not jagged. I follow the straight line by pressing the left mouse button at the very beginning of the edge. Then I go to the very end of it, and while holding Shift, I press left mouse button again. It will automatically draw a straight line from point A to point B. Once finished with the edge refining, crop the image and move on to the next one. Select the subject, mask it, refine the mask, and crop it. Once you've done removing the backgrounds, it's time to save the images. Hit Ctrl-Alt-Shift-S to open the Save window. Set the image format to PNG24 and turn the transparency on. Save it to the folder of your choice. And go to After Effects. Import the images and drop the first one onto the timeline. Go to the Effects, Color Correction, Black and White. The image is black and white now. Decrease its size if it's too big. Place it here so that the center of the image is directly above the date shape. Now let's create the animation mask for the image. Select the rectangle tool, any color, stroke, off, and draw a similar shape. Set the size of the shape to 650 by 450. Rename the layer to Computer Alpha. Turn its visibility off. Go to the Images Track Matte settings and set it to Alpha Matte, Computer Alpha. Now, the image will only show where the computer alpha layer is. Open the computer alpha layer and set the keyframe next to this size. Move the keyframe to the 8th frame or so. Set the Y size to 0. Now the image has the appearing animation. Let's make it more smooth. Right-click on the last keyframe, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease In. Let's make it even smoother. Go to the speed graph and pull this lever to the left. Not this one, this. Move the keyframe to the right for a smoother slowdown. The graph has to look like this. Be steep at the beginning and smooth at the end. The animation starts really fast and slows down gently. Turn the motion blur on for this layer. This way, the animation will have more blurry edges when it moves fast, and the blur will reduce the slower the animation is. Okay, I see that the title is too small. Increase the title size to 56 pixels. Rename the date layer to the date pole, so it will be less confusing to deal with layers. Hit A to open the anchor point controls and move the anchor point to the very bottom of the layer. This way, when we animate the scale, the date pole layer will grow from the bottom to the top. Now it's time to animate the date pole. Go to 0 seconds on a timeline. Select the date pole layer and hit S to open the scale. Unlink the values. Set the keyframe. Move it to the 10th frame. Set the scale Y to 0. Turn the motion blur on for this layer. Right-click on the last keyframe, Keyframe Assistant, Easy Ease In. Go to the speed graph editor and pull the lever to the left. Not this one, this. It starts fast and ends up smooth, just like the computer alpha animation. After we finish the date pole animation, let's animate the text. Select the date text layer. Go to Animation, Browse Presets. It will open the Adobe Bridge. In the bridge, go to Text, Animate In. Double-click on Fade Up characters. Despite it looks like nothing happened, it had added the fade up animation to the text layer. Close the Adobe Bridge. Go to After Effects. As you can see, the animation is applied to the text layer. Select the layer and hit U twice to see the keyframes. Move the keyframes to the beginning of a timeline. Move the second keyframe to the 12th frame. Now it looks like this. Let's copy the animation and paste it into the Apple I layer. Unfold the 1976 layer, text, copy the animator 1 by hitting Ctrl+C. Then select Apple I layer and paste the animator 1 by hitting the Ctrl+V. Move the Apple I layer a few frames further down the timeline. We want our 1976 title animation to begin together with the date pole animation, the Apple I layer animation to start in a few frames after that, and the image animation to be the last one in this sequence. Select the image and computer alpha layers and move them down the timeline. The computer alpha animation moves too fast, so move the last keyframe further to slow it down, and move the Apple I layer to begin at the 6th or the 7th frame. Not bad. Mark the layers with the orange color to see that these elements are together. Then select all these layers that make our slide and duplicate them. Move them to the top and change the color to purple. Select all the purple layers and move them to the right. Select the image in the new slide, and while holding Alt, drag and release the image over slide 2. This image will replace the original one. You'll have to change the position and scale so that the new image fits well. Move the slide 2 layers even more to the right. Now we'll turn the slide upside down. Select the date pole layer and hit R to open the rotation controls. Set the rotation to 180 degrees. Set the date to 1977 and change the name to Apple II. Move them below the timeline. When moving the image, select both the image and the computer alpha layers and move them down. Change the position of the image so it looks centered. Now we have two types of slides, the upper one and the lower one. Move the lower slide layers a bit closer to the upper slide. I use one cell of a grid for approximately 1 year between the dates. Now, let's animate the timeline. Select the timeline layer. Hit A to open the anchor point controls and move the anchor point to the very left side of the timeline. This will be the point of origin where the timeline begins. Move the timeline back to its original place. Hit S to open the scale controls. Unlink the scale. Create a keyframe with 100x value and 100y value and move it to the end of the timeline. Go to 0 seconds on a timeline. Set the x value to 10 and add a keyframe. We'll fine-tune this value along the way. Now let's find the perfect spot for the timeline to begin. If it begins with a very low value, it will go very fast and will not give us time to read the first slide. If it starts too far, the animation will look too static, and we don't want that. Turn the motion blur on for this layer. Along the way, we'll move the slide animations so that they begin when the timeline animation reaches the position of the date pole layers. So the date pole layers originate from the timeline. Duplicate the upper slide again and move it further in time. Move it to the right. Set the date to 1983. Rename the title to Apple Lisa and replace the Apple One image with the image of Apple Lisa. Fine-tune the animation timings by moving all the upper slide 2 layers along the timeline. They should appear once the timeline reaches the date pole 3 layer. Once you're happy with the timing and the position, move to the next slide and repeat the routine. Duplicate the previous slide, rename it, and replace the image. Drag the duplicated layers to the top of the timeline. Move them further down the timeline and sync their appearance with the timeline animation. Move on to the next slide and repeat. Once you've finished duplicating and syncing, let's create a vignette to darken the edges. Create a new adjustment layer. Layer, new adjustment layer. Select the layer, hit enter and name it vignette. Then add the curves effect. Effect, color correction, curves. Drop the curves to something like this. Select the rectangular tool. Cycle through the mouse by pressing Q on the keyboard. We need the ellipse tool. Double click on it. This will create a mask on the whole area of the layer. Set the mask mode to subtract or click the inverted check mark. It should be either one of those two. Set mask feather to 350. And now the edges look darker than the center of the image. Great! Now it's time for fine-tuning. I see that the images are located too close to the text layers. Select all the down image layers, the purple ones, and computer alpha layers. You can do it by holding Ctrl and clicking on the layers. Once selected, move them down a bit. Repeat with the upper titles, the orange layers. Now it's time to add a camera, but before doing that, select all the layers and switch them into the 3D mode. Create a camera by going to the layer, new camera, or by hitting Ctrl-Alt-Shift-C on a keyboard. Select the 50mm preset. Create a new null object by going to the layer, new null object, or by hitting Ctrl-Alt-Shift-Y on a keyboard. Name it Camera Controls. Make the null object a 3D layer by clicking on this switch, and parent the camera to the null by dragging the pick whip over the camera layer and releasing it. If you can't see the parenting options, hit F4 on the keyboard to cycle through the modes. Turn the visibility of the camera controls layer off. Unfold the layer and set the X rotation to 16 and Y rotation to 38. Move the camera a bit to the left and set the Z value to 722. Once you're happy with the starting point, set a keyframe and go to the end of a timeline. Move the camera X position to the very end of your animation. It will automatically create a keyframe. The camera animation looks like this. It's following the timeline animation, but it has one problem. Our background now looks misplaced and we need to fix it. Select the grid layer, unfold it, transform. In the position controls, set the Z value to 1335. Set the scale of the grid layer to 154 and move it in the X and Y axis so it closes the gaps. Don't move it in the Z axis. Its value has to stay at 1335. Duplicate the layer by hitting Ctrl D and move it to the right by the X axis. Make sure that the grid cells are aligned. Then go to the London poverty map. Hit R to open the rotation controls, set Z rotation to 90 degrees. This way, the map will cover the screen from top to bottom. Set the map scale to 87%. Duplicate it and move it to the right. Select both poverty map layers, hit P to open the position controls and set the Z position value to 1426 for both. Place them so that they fill the background. Change the Z position to 1426 on the aerial image too. Duplicate it by hitting Ctrl D and move it further to the right. You can also flip it vertically so that the patterns do not repeat so obviously. To do this, right-click on the image, transform, flip vertical. Align it so that the connection looks seamless. The beginning of a camera animation starts way too close to the end of the screen. Let's move it and give more space on the left side. I can see that the date poles are not quite in sync with the timeline. They begin either earlier or later than they have to. Let's fix it by moving the slide layers on the timeline so that they are in sync now. Move the background layers to cover the holes if needed. I see that the camera angle is too steep. Go to the camera controls layer, hit R to open the rotation controls. Decrease the value of X rotation to 16 and Y rotation to 34. Once this camera looks good, let's create another camera. Duplicate the camera 1 and camera controls layers. Place the duplicated layers on top and move them down on the timeline. You can place the playhead at the time you like and hit the right bracket while the layers are selected. This will move the beginning of the layer to the time of a playhead. Select the bottom camera and camera controls layers and find the spot on the timeline where your first camera ends. In my case, it's 16 seconds and 11 frames. Hit the Alt right bracket on the keyboard. It will cut the layers at this spot. Select Camera Controls 2 layer, hit P to open the position controls and remove the keyframes from the position by hitting the stopwatch. Hit R to open the rotation and set all the values to 0. We have now reset the camera. Zoom out the camera by increasing the Z position. Once you're happy with the starting position of the camera too, hit the stopwatch to create a keyframe. Go to the end of the timeline and zoom out. It will automatically set the second keyframe. Right-click on the keyframe, Keyframe Assistant Easy Ease In. Go to the graph editor and make the last keyframe more smooth. Add the minor adjustments to the camera keyframes if needed. Once you're happy with the camera animation, it's time to make the final fix to the background. Move the background layers, scale them up, and duplicate them to cover the entire background. And of course, don't forget to change the scale, rotation and position of the background copy layers, so that they do not look like they are repeating themselves. And here's the result. Thank you for watching. Put a like if you found this video useful and subscribe if you want to see more. Bye.